Good morning, everybody, and a very warm welcome to Onward, and a particularly warm welcome to our special guest, Sir James Cleverly. It's a highlight of our conference programme to have James here, someone who needs minimal introduction from me, someone who served across government in an absolute panoply of roles, most notably as Foreign and Home Secretary, but who also brings a wealth of experience across all levels of ministerial rank. And now, of course, someone who has returned to the shadow front bench to help lead the fight back to government, and in a role which I personally think could not be more important, the Shadow Housing Secretary, someone tasked with reinvigorating the Conservative narrative around opportunity, around home ownership, and around building communities in a way which will allow us all to be better off. James, thank you very much for being here with us this morning.
Thank you. Oh, crikey, that's booming through. Cheers, Simon. Well, you're absolutely right in your introduction and the little kind of sotto voce conversation that we had before they turned the mics on. This is such an incredibly important agenda. As Conservatives, we have absolutely got to reoccupy the political space of aspiration, of about home ownership, of about a stake in society. This has got to be our thing. It traditionally has been. I think it's now going begging. The Labour Party are flirting with it a bit, Reform are flirting with it a bit. No one's really embraced it in the way that it needs to be embraced. So I think it's very much in our gift to do so. So we need to be the party of aspiration and reward for effort and hard work. So that's point one. And point two, you were saying there's a real energy around this. I think there is a real appetite for this, and that I would love to think it's a personal fan base that we're trying to get through the door before we closed off the room.
I think it may well have been.
Well, I'm not. I would like to think that was the.
But let's not stroke his ego too much.
But I suspect it is in large part because there is a widespread realisation that home ownership and stable, somewhere stable to live is going to be a key battleground going to the next general election. And I think those two things allied is one of the reasons why we're getting a lot of buzz around this agenda here at conference.
Well, that's certainly borne out by our polling evidence. So on Friday, we released a big Onward polling project, Becoming Blue, which looks at voters under 40, and it asks them what matters most to you. And absolutely front and centre of that comes housing. So 38% of respondents picked out housing as one of the top three issues worrying them. And I think when you then drill deeper into the data and you ask, well, why aren't you voting Conservative, even if you often share lots of underlying Conservative values, it comes down to, are we really on their side, A, and do we deliver what we say? And I think that gap between our promises and our delivery record is going to be something which we're going to have to try and confront, I think, more than any other, probably, in this space. Yeah,
and I think this is one of the reasons why, on a macro level, Kemi's absolutely right in her approach to policy and policy announcements. And I know that it has, we've got to be realistic about this. I know it has caused frustration, because a lot of people saying, you should be saying more, you should be saying it more loudly, you should be all over the media, you should be doing all this kind of stuff. Kemi is a naturally very thoughtful person. She's got an engineering background, and I think that plays out in how she approaches policy. And the think about it first and then say it means that you sometimes get beaten to the punch by other political parties who say it first and then think about it. And the fact that, for example, pretty much every single policy that Reform puts forward falls over even before the end of the press conference, let alone before people start crawling over the small print, I think is evidence that they are still a party addicted to saying stuff rather than doing stuff. The Labour Party are just all over the place, and I increasingly think that the British people have written them off. And so our position has got to be, we have thought about this, we are taking it seriously, we're not just going to say stuff, we're also going to attach what we say to a delivery plan, because the gulf between narrative and delivery is generating a cynicism about politics in general, which I think is really, really, really unhealthy. And amplifying that, as I think both Labour and Reform are doing, is really playing with fire. And I think Kemi's absolutely right to say, you know what, we're going to take a little bit longer to get it right. And then the stuff that Mel was talking about this morning, it's like, here are the receipts. This is one side of the ledger, this is the balancing side of the ledger. That with our ECHR policy, for example, here is the headline, here is the detail. With the stuff around net zero and cheaper energy, here is the requirement, here is where it's going to come from. And I think that is what will set us apart. And the same has to be true in housing. Labour, we'll build 1.5 million homes. And what's your plan? We'll build 1.5 million homes. So what's your delivery plan? We're going to build one. You can't just say it. You can't just keep saying it, because no one is believing them.
Yeah.
And we've got to be different to that.
Yeah. And looking at the role, obviously I think one of the things which strikes anyone looking at the Conservative Party's recent record on house building is that we were a bit equivocal about what we really believed on this in government. And I think there may be a battle. Is it fair to characterise the battle as being half about the policy detail, but half about persuading our party to become full-throated champions of this agenda?
So I think there is a lot of fairness in that observation. I'm not going to call it a criticism. I think it's an observation. I think there's a lot to be said about that. And I'm now going to perhaps lose the room and maybe even lose the support of my dear friend up here on the stage. So NIMBY is not an illogical position. And it's not even it's not an unreasonable position. If you've worked hard, and the maths show that you have to work increasingly hard to own a home of your own, and you've bought something, perhaps you've bought a view, perhaps you've bought into living somewhere in green space, perhaps that's what you've saved up, you've worked through your life, and you've moved into your forever home, which was the home you chose because of all these things. And then suddenly someone comes along and fundamentally changes what it is you have bought and paid for. And your perception is you're getting nothing in recompense. Saying not in my backyard is an entirely logical position. So if we want to move people from being NIMBYs to being YIMBYs and saying yes to stuff, you can't just shout at them or make them feel guilty about protecting what they bought. You have to show them that it is actually in their benefit. And this is as true of voters, and it's true of colleagues, MPs, and candidates. We've got to make people, it's not about making people say yes, it's about making them want to say yes. And we need to have a real think about how we balance the offer and the ask when it comes to people that have worked really, really hard to buy a particular life for themselves, which they fear is going to be taken away. That is the subtle difference. And I'm not going to pretend we have all the answers just yet, but I think we're on a really good path, rather than just barking at people and making them feel guilty, asking ourselves, okay, what would it take? And sometimes literally asking them, what would it take? There are no young people in this village. I get this in my constituency. I've got villages which are growing, new houses being built, and the primary school headcount is in terminal decline. So what do we do about that?
Yeah, and I think that definitely is, I think, one of the angles into it. The intergenerational unfairness of the society we've got, I think, isn't something which is just a sort of academic concern. It's something which affects everyone. And actually, most older voters I have spoken to do recognise that a society where their children, or in particular their grandchildren, are not going to be able to get that home of their own, or at least not get it anywhere near where their family lives or where they want to live is quite a powerful moral imperative to build.
And so I have not a unique, but I think a slightly unusual family structure. So I was born and brought up in southeast London, and my London place is basically where I was born and brought up. And I have family, both my English family and my African family, geographically quite close by. For many members of my family, it is literally walking distance. So we have a pre-existing support network. My aunts and uncles, as they're getting older, my dad, as they're getting we can pop in, we can see each other, we can check in on each other, we can help each other out with childcare, school runs, that kind of stuff, like families do. Yeah. Because we are geographically proximate. If we have a situation where children, grandchildren have no credible chance of living anywhere near their extended family, we shouldn't be surprised when we get social fragmentation, which I think we can probably all agree is a bad thing. And if you want to do something about it, you've got to ask yourself, how can we create a situation where children and grandchildren have got a credible chance of living near their extended family? And again, that's part of the turning no's into yeses. It's kind of like, I used to be in sales. Anyone that's been in sales will know, like conditional close. If I could show you a way that ... might you say yes? Yeah. This is what we have to start doing. If I could show you a way that you'd have good quality homes in keeping with the local vernacular, homes that your family can afford to live in, close to where you live, so you get to see your grandchildren, you get to see, you get to have them over to play. Is that something you might be interested in? Because then suddenly that's a very, very different conversation to the, would you like to lose your view of the golf course?
Quite. Another angle, I think, which matters when it comes to selling house building, in particular in the greater southeast, which is where the problem is most concentrated, is that we show that we're actually densifying where we ought to first, that is to say, in our cities, and in particular in London. And of course, it's in light of that London's unbelievable house building problem is, I think, probably the single most pressing policy issue in this space. So, the context is that Morior recorded that in the first half of this year, 2,158 private starts took place in the whole of London, a city of 8 to 10 million people. James, what's your vision for how we get London building? And do you think that if Sadiq Khan continues to fail so miserably, there is a case for taking back some of the powers that the mayor exercises and actually making sure that they are applied as they ought to be? Because my view has always been that devolution could and should be a two-way street.
So I'm giving a speech at 4 o'clock this afternoon. And at various fringe events, bits of my speech are being nibbled at. But the bottom line is, and I've already hinted at this, Sadiq Khan's catastrophic failure. And it's not just being a little bit off the pace. It is... imagine that London's housing need is Usain Bolt. Khan's delivery is like a tortoise compared with Usain. It is so off the pace. It doesn't even feel like it's the same universe. And the problem is, of course, that then puts pressure, as you say, on the wider southeast, where there is definitely a housing need, into suburban London, into the home counties. And one of the things we've got to look at is we've I think, allowed a set of constraints to be created whereby it is easier to get an arable field and turn it into housing than it is getting a brownfield site near transport infrastructure, near the nighttime economy, near opportunity for employment. And that is perverse. That is absolutely perverse. And we know it doesn't have to be this way, because when Conservatives have been in power, whether it be the Docklands or the Olympic Park, we have done proper, not even regeneration, it's more than that. It's more than regeneration. It is a renaissance, it's a rebirth of some of these urban areas. And we've done it before, and we should do it again. And if Khan won't do it, then bloody hell, we'll have it off of him, and we'll do it properly.
Because I think on a non-partisan basis, you look at Manchester, and what strikes you every time you come here, you know, do I necessarily think that building skyscrapers is the best way to do it? But Burnham is getting stuff built here, and you know, in that sense, the contrast between Manchester, which does feel dynamic, and London, which feels completely and utterly, you know, deadlocked, is very stark.
And Andy Burnham inadvertently has highlighted Khan's ineptitude. Because Khan will turn around and say, oh, central government, central government, central government. It's like, well, actually, Andy Street was able to get stuff done. Andy Burnham is able to get stuff done. So maybe, just maybe, it's Sadiq Khan that's the problem?
Yeah, I think so. In your conference speech last year, where you had a really good section on housing, you said, and I quote, "It's right that we cut stamp duty for first-time buyers, but it should be our mission to abolish stamp duty on homes altogether. It's a bad tax that stifles transactions in the housing market. It deters people from downsizing, and like all taxes, it ultimately increases costs to buyers." Now, I appreciate there are many, many equities in this space, but is that something you would like to continue to advocate for in the years ahead? Because stamp duty is obviously an elephant in the room when it comes to how our housing market operates or doesn't operate.
So I didn't put anything in that speech that I didn't believe strongly, but you're referring back to the point I made about doing the proper homework beforehand. I mean, that is I think a passionate cri de coeur for a philosophy which is about reducing the regulatory and taxation burden of things that we want to unlock. Mel is doing a really, really good job of ensuring that at every step we have proper credibility about the plans we put forward. I would love nothing more than to reduce the taxation burden of property transactions, get the market flowing, because I didn't have the space to put it in the speech. But actually, if you think, what do people do when they move house? The first thing they do is they start spending money on the house. Even if the house is in really good nick, you get decorators in, you maybe do stuff in the garden, you buy white goods, you spend money, and all those transactions are taxed. So you're getting builders in to do this work. You're doing a lot of churn, all of which generates tax revenues. What we are not going to do, and what I'm not going to advocate, is now that we're in a position where we're saying that we will show you the calculations that underpin all our policies. I'm not going to make, like reform, a tax commitment that doesn't have that corresponding line on the balance sheet. Mel's doing a really, really good job on that. Of course, I would love to see, I think all of us would love to see a much, much, much more fluid housing market. And I will make reference to that in the speech. And ultimately, I will keep pushing for reducing taxes wherever and whenever I can find there's not a tax. I can't think of a tax that I love. There are some that I'll tolerate, some that I hate. I don't think there's any of them that I love.
Quite right. Your brief as Shadow MHCLG obviously encompasses the community's brief as well. And, you know, we meet here in a city which has obviously, you know, had a awful and tragic event in the course of the last week. And Shabana Mahmood said, and I thought it was a really interesting comment, almost for the first time from a Labour minister this weekend, we have a problem with integration in our society. Now, I think we sure do. I suppose the more interesting question in some ways is, what is the Conservative philosophy about how we can try and fix this? Because, you know, we obviously we talk about immigration numbers. We know they have been too high. But I think there is a secondary and very important subsidiary aspect of this, which is how do we make sure that people who come to Britain actually subscribe to British values?
I think the left, and I'm going to be uncharacteristically generous of spirit towards the left now, so make a note in your diary because you will not see this happen very often. I think there was a well-intentioned desire to be like a good host. And there's always been this bit of a contradictory position where we say, you know, when in Rome, do as the Romans do. But also, we've had this thing like, you know, if you invite someone into your home, you want them to kind of feel at home. And I think that is a fairly traditional kind of not exclusively British thing, but it's a very British thing. You know, you don't want to embarrass people. You want to make them feel at home. Blah blah blah. I think we have allowed that that generosity of spirit to go too far. This is why I don't like multiculturalism. There is a British culture. That culture is made up of a variety of elements. I did an essay on Conservative Home well over a decade ago, probably coming up to like 20 years ago now, where I was talking about things like fish and chips. Fish and chips is an undisputably British thing, yeah? Although chips are an American, a relatively recent American import, only a couple of 100 years old, and deep fried fish is a Jewish Portuguese import. And basically all the things that we regard as fairly British are typically things we've imported. But they are still British culture, and we've blended them with all the other things to get something which I think is uniquely beautiful in the world. What we don't do, or what we shouldn't do, is I think what the left have done, which is to say, oh, actually, you know what, you can have a parallel life. So if you're saying your culture objectifies women and treats them as second-class citizens, and if your culture says that if a girl is drunk and wearing a miniskirt, she is allowed to be raped,
Not okay.
that is unacceptable. That is unacceptable. And if it is acceptable elsewhere in the world, fine. It is not acceptable here. And if you want to be here, you subscribe to this cultural norm. And you respect other people's religious belief, even if you passionately disagree with their religious beliefs, because the same rules apply to them. We don't dictate who you believe, which God you believe in. We don't even dictate which language you speak. What we are saying, though, is there are rules, there are norms, and there are laws. You play by the rules, everything's cool and groovy. If you don't, then we have a problem. And this implication that people can live lives on parallel tracks, I think has been really, really, really damaging. And more so is where that's become so ingrained in the minds of, again, I'm sure well-intentioned public servants, where they say, oh, it would be culturally inappropriate to say to those people that behaviour is unacceptable. And sadly, we saw this. We're talking about the rape gangs, which is a sadly very contemporary example. But I remember Victoria Climbié, the little girl that was abused to death by her guardians in Haringey. And when the report came out, she'd been presented to children's services on multiple occasions, but the tone of the reporting was African parents beat their children, and it would be culturally inappropriate to tell them not to do so. And we have got to stop that. And that is the best way. You show everybody that the rules apply universally, whether you've been here for 100 generations or only 100 days. The rules apply to everyone equally, dispassionately, and they will be enforced. That is actually how you build properly integrated and happy communities.
Well, I think all of us here would say hear to that. And one of the particular chilling risks as we move into next year is going to be the government's definition of Islamophobia, which feels like it has the risk of seriously suppressing our ability to critique aspects of Islam. If a Conservative government is returned to power in 2029, is it widely understood that should things continue as they are, that definition will be repealed or at least substantially revised?
I am completely against anything which ends up being a blasphemy law by the back door. As I say, we have a long-standing tradition of religious tolerance, but we also have a long-standing tradition of freedom of speech, freedom to offend. It's not a duty to offend, but a freedom to offend. And losing that, I think, would be completely the wrong direction. I'm dead against it. Kemi's dead against it. I think there's pretty much universal acceptance in the Conservative Party that it would be damaging, it would be counterproductive, and in many instances, I think, rather sinister. So that would be off the table with Conservatives.
That's really helpful. Thank you. And one of the issues where obviously you and Kemi have previously been somewhat at odds is over the issue of the European Convention on Human Rights and the announcement yesterday around this. How confident are you that this is a position which can unite the party rather than divide it? And how confident are you as well that this will indeed allow us to bear down on the unacceptable, indeed scandalous levels of illegal immigration into the UK?
So the perception of disagreement between me and Kemi, I think, genuinely has been massively overplayed. Massively overplayed. My position, and funnily enough, someone tweeted about this, an interview that I gave a little while ago, where I basically said, leaving the ECHR is not a silver bullet, and if we choose to do that, we would need to explain what other things we would also need to do. And at the time, that was cleverly at odds with Kemi Badenoch. Kemi Badenoch had a conversation with Lord David Wolfson, KC, and she said, write me a legal opinion on the practicalities and implications of leaving the ECHR, particularly when it comes to things like border controls, protecting our veterans, prioritising British nationals for public services and stuff. And in a 180-page report, Lord Wolfson said, and I paraphrase, but only a bit, leaving the ECHR is not a silver bullet, and we will need to think carefully about the implications of and what else we would need to do, which strikes me as being remarkably similar. What Kemi said when she looked at that report is, that is spot on, that's exactly what I think. And the point of differentiation is not between me and Kemi, because there's, at best, a fag paper between us, perhaps not even that. The real differentiation is between Reform's position, which is, if we leave the ECHR, all our problems go away. Bullshit. The bottom line is, if we leave the ECHR, and there are other things that we will have to unpick, which are not going to be simple, but they are important, we can then set about re-establishing control of our own borders, protection of our veterans, prioritisation for British nationals rather than foreign nationals, etc., etc. But it's going to take work, and what Kemi has committed to, through Lord Wolfson and others, is to do that work so that we've got a credible plan, rather than what Reform wants, which is an eye-catching headline. And because of their lack of effort and thought and rigour, I have no doubt that if, and I genuinely don't think this is going to be a circumstance that comes about, if they were in a position to deliver what they promise, which is to leave the ECHR, leave it at that, we would still be mired in all of the problems, indeed perhaps even some worse, than we currently have, without fixing any of the problems. That is the big difference between me and Kemi and Lord Wolfson and Chris Philp and the Conservatives and Reform. We've got a policy, they've got a headline. That's the difference.
Well, I think that's a very good summary. And before I hand over to the audience, because we're at the midway point of our conversation, I will go to a slightly lighter question, which is, do you have a favourite party conference memory? And what was your first ever party conference?
It's my first. So I think you and I have not discussed the details of this, but last year at the leadership thing, I kept being quite surprised when people coming up to me saying, "Oh, you're the flag bearer of the centre or the left of centre One Nation group within the Conservative Party," and you've known me for a long time, and I think you know where my political appetites are, and I was always quite taken aback by this. I shouldn't be surprised, because I'm quite conscious that maybe I should be flattered by this. People have a habit of projecting what they kind of want you to be. And the reason I say that was my first ever party conference speech. Ian Duncan Smith was party leader. And I don't know if you remember back in the day, you're too young and beautiful, but there are some, you sir, for example, old enough in the room to remember back then. There would often be slots where party activists had little kind of 1-2 minute speeches up on the main stage. And I was doing that in Home Affairs debate. And I'd written a speech basically saying, and I stand by this, and I think I've been vindicated, that the Conservative Party should be the natural home for ethnic minority voters, particularly because we have a strong sense of self-reliance, we have a strong sense of family, we have a strong sense of duty. And this was back in 2002, I think, 2002, yeah. I was amazed that we haven't made more of that with voters, and we could and should be the natural home for ethnic minority voters. Now, the fact that Kemi is party leader, I feel slightly vindicated by this. Yeah. But the thing that struck me at the time, two people came up to me. So Julian Brazier came up to me, who's a member of the Cornerstone Group, the traditional kind of faith and family, perceived sometimes being the old guard of social conservatism. I'm not sure that's completely fair, but that's where he was positioned. And a guy called Rishi Saha, who was working with a young lad called David Cameron, who was very much talking about new type of conservatism and redefining ourselves. And they both came up to me, having listened to exactly the same speech. And Julian said, you should think about standing for election, because that kind of faith and family and traditional conservative values, that's what this party needs to hear. And seconds later, Rishi Saha came up to me and said, you should stand to be a Conservative MP, because that break from the past, that forward thinking, embracing diversity, that is the future of the Conservative Party. And they were both listening to the same speech. I think that was one of my favourite bits. That was back when diversity of views was one of our strengths. And I think we should get back there, because they were both, of course, staunchly conservative, and they both played an incredibly important part in our success over the next couple of decades. And my view is, as a party, we need to get back into the habit of concentrating on the 95% position of agreement rather than the 5% areas of disagreement, because otherwise we're going to be in opposition for a long time. And I have no desire for that to be the case.
Absolutely. Well, on that note, let's open up the floor to diversity of opinion.
Yes, indeed.
And I'll take questions in groups of 3. If you're able to give your name when you introduce yourself, that would be fantastic. So I'll go with the gentleman in the blue coat at the back, and then the gentleman in the purple jacket, and then the lady in the second row here.
Hi, James. A long time since we met in Balborough, in Bolsover, when you were out campaigning. Yeah.
Yes.
Planning. What do we propose to do about the unfair system that we have at the moment? For instance, where 106 monies contribute towards infrastructure or don't. There is a cut-off point where buildings can be put up. There is not a penny paid to any kind of infrastructure. You get a situation where councils a situation we've got at the moment, where send money, comes out of 106, they decide to defer it. How can, that's a real get-out clause.
Yeah.
When counties are struggling with that kind of money.
Yeah.
But what can we do about it?
Cool.
Hi, Jane.
Oh, wait for the. I don't think that's purple. I think that's
that's like a dark pink.
That's a maroon. That's a maroon.
Hi, James. I'm Sebastian Gradsky.
Claret. No,
Thank you. But
Sebastian Gore.
when you were Home Secretary, you very rightly decreased immigration by 50%. And I just want to ask you, what opposition, if any, did you experience from the civil service? Because I know that the Treasury has a flawed methodology of presuming that every single legal migrant contributes the same, and if you attempt to decrease it, they're going to tell you have less fiscal headroom. So how did you deal with that opposition?
Indeed. Good question.
Thank you, Sir James. My name's Carol Traves. I'm a Chartered Town Planner, so my question is about planning, or rather it's not really a question, it's a request. So my request really is, while we're going through this renewal programme as a party, to not rush planning reforms, not rush into layering more planning policy. We have the planning system, and why we're not delivering the homes is such a multifaceted reason. Please, can I ask, look at the legislation, look at 2004 Act, look at 2011 Act, look at the quangos, look at how development is financed, look at everything. The rush, at the moment, we are town and country panicking, And that is really poor for Britain, and it's poor outcomes. And then when we're back in government, and you're back as our Secretary of State, I would like to know that we have a really rock-solid plan that's really robust and rounded.
Thank you. So your frustrations with how the money flows or doesn't flow, I think is a big part of the reason why it is logical for people to say no to stuff. Because the whole point of Section 106 was to say, look, yeah, you are losing something. You are perhaps losing some views, or you're losing a little bit of ease of traffic flow. There's going to be a bit more pressure on the doctor's surgery or whatever it might be. There was a recognition that when stuff gets built, it affects people's lives. Sometimes they perceive that as a negative effect. And 106 was meant to mitigate that. But the point is, if the 106 money just disappears into a local government black hole and the local people never see it, or even if it is spent and it's spent on political pet projects from the local council in different parts of the district, nowhere near where the stuff is built, the natural response for people is to say no to stuff. So we have to have a much, much closer relationship between the perceived loss, I'm not saying it's an actual loss, but the perceived loss of whatever that might be, and the perceived benefit. Now, some of the perceived benefit could be financial, but I actually think that things like infrastructure, that people can actually see and actually turns up and actually makes a positive difference to their lives, is a much more useful counterbalance than some money that disappears into a council black hole, which may or may not be spent, but local people don't know. So you're absolutely right, there needs to be a much closer relationship. I'll come back to your question in a sec, but I think, again, you're right. There is a terrible habit. We see this with the tax code. We see this with planning. A decision gets made. It has consequences. Some of the consequences we don't like. So we put a sticking plaster over those consequences, which then trigger other consequences. So we put sticking plasters over that one, which triggers more. And then you get this weird situation where something which didn't exist for most of the history of the built environment is now, I was about to say like a telephone directory. Again, for the young and beautiful in the room, again, sir, not us, you think, what the hell's a telephone directory? You know, it's this massive, great big document with everyone's phone numbers in it. And we're now creating situations where it is so burdensome that it is put a regulatory burden on the small local builders, which is why we now have a smaller and smaller number of bigger and bigger builders. And they have their place, volume builders have their place, but the fact we have pretty much allowed the small local building firms to be destroyed as part of the market mix, we've got to recognise that that is because of the burden of regulation. And with regard to my position on net migration, you are right. There was a belief that all migration adds to the economy. And that is flawed in a number of areas. So firstly, not every person that was coming into the UK was working. So one of the things that I found when I stepped into the Home Office is people were coming in on certain visa types and being able to bring a load of non-working family members with them. So a visa for a working person would often end up with 5 people, maybe 6 people coming in. So firstly, I'm not sure the math stacks up. And secondly, we should, and we're now much better at this, we should be thinking about GDP per capita. So for example, there's not a criticism of India, but India has a GDP significantly higher than Switzerland. GDP per capita in Switzerland is considerably higher than in India. And so if you're only looking at headline GDP, you have a perverse incentive to get lots and lots and lots and lots of people in, whether or not they are really economically contributing. And that was one of the flaws underpinning the Treasury. And Simon will know a lot of Treasury orthodoxies that are really hard to shake loose. The kind of migration is good for the economy orthodoxy was deeply embedded. And I was I recognise if you wanted to bring down net migration, you had to demonstrate to other cabinet colleagues, including Treasury, including Health and Social Care, including DEFRA with regard to farming, that you could reduce net migration without breaking their budgets. That was the conversation that we had, and that is ultimately what unlocked the visa changes, which halved net migration. But crikey, getting that past the civil service was a challenge.
Yes. Ellie, and then gentleman at the back with the hand raised, and then the lady in the green, please.
Is it really a good idea to block Tory candidates who don't agree with leaving the ECHR from standing at the next election? I mean, doesn't that just mean that there'll be far fewer candidates who would be great MPs but just disagree with Kemi on one thing?
Okay, cool.
Rob Garnham, Chairman of Cheltenham. James, thank you for coming to the Southwest reception earlier this year. And I gave you a line there. When campaigning, people say to me it's very difficult to dislike a Lib Dem. And I say, well, it's well worth taking the trouble to do so. Seriously, though, what do we...
That took me a while, but I got there.
What would we be saying now to the Reform people when we knock on the door, many of whom were Conservatives? Yeah. What would you say if you were knocking on the door? Thank you. Sure.
I'll keep it short. What is the current Conservative vision for social and affordable housing?
Cool. So on the situation with regard to the ECHR, what Kemi has said is that this is going to be a manifesto commitment. And when Conservatives put themselves forward to be candidates at general elections, they subscribe to the manifesto commitments that the party has. And that is neither an unusual or an unreasonable point to take. Now, there are lots of things which come up during the course of a parliament which are not in election manifestos. And if someone said, well, hang on a second, the party's made a decision about this, this is not something I agree with, and they have a word with the Chief Whip to say, look, I'm still a staunch Conservative and I will support the party on other elements, but this is an issue, it wasn't in the manifesto and it's at odds with my view. I don't think that is an illegitimate position to take, and it can be done in good spirit and the conversation whether it's happened. But when something is a manifesto commitment, particularly when it's been done in the way that Kemi has done it, which is a year's worth of thought, a proper explanation of the trade-offs. And again, this is the difference with reform. There are trade-offs, and pretending there are no trade-offs, I think is foolish and dishonest. And the report is there are trade-offs. There are things that we're going to have to do differently. There are other things that we are going to have to change. This is the homework, but this is our party's position for these reasons, and here is a compelling evidence pack. It is going to be a manifesto commitment. And if I were to say, do we think that Conservative candidates should stand up and say, I'm a Conservative candidate and I disagree with my party's manifesto? I think you'd regard that as a bit daft. So, tonally, how you present it, it's been written up that this is an ultimatum. The point that I said, and I said this at Shadow Cabinet, it's been reported, so I don't think I'm giving away state secrets, is I said, I don't think we need to coerce anybody, because when they actually see the level of detail, the thought that's gone behind this policy, the argument really is compelling. And I actually don't think we're going to have a load of milk spilt over people subscribing to what is going to be Conservative policy. I am going to nick your joke. I want to just full disclosure, I am going to nick your joke. With regard to what I say to people who have drifted off to reform, I was knocking on doors on Saturday morning in my own constituency in North Essex. Unsurprisingly, I bumped into a number of people who previously voted Conservative, previously voted for me, that are saying they are going to vote for reform. One of the things that I found really interesting was when I kind of probed them about how locked in they were to this voting of reform. In almost all, not absolutely all, but in almost all of their answers, they went on to say what we would need to do in order for them to get their vote back. So I do think the current support for reform is big, but it is fragile. If we get our act together, and I think we are, I think we can win a lot, not all, but a lot of those people back. And what they want, funnily enough, is not actually that dissimilar to what Lib Dem voters, that people who have drifted off the Lib Dems want. They want fairness. Their definition of fairness might be ever so slightly different, but they want to know that the system works, and it works for the right people. They want us to be generous of spirit. That's particularly true of people that say they're thinking of voting Lib Dem. But that generosity of spirit is not just writing a blank cheque to the world. That is completely undeliverable, and we need to be honest about that. And ultimately, what everybody always wants, and this will be particularly true once Rachel Reeves has taken a sledgehammer to our economic credibility, they will want the books to balance, and they will want a party that has got a credible position with regard to repairing the British economy, which will be in a shocking state. By the next general election, I take no pleasure in saying this, the British economy will be in a shocking state because of the ineptitude of the Labour government. And at that point, the Lib Dems kind of falling in lakes nonsense will be laughed out of court, and it deserves to be. And reforms kind of never mind the detail, just listen to Farage spout headlines. Again, that will not be taken seriously. And the party that has a credible plan will be taken seriously. And as it stands at the moment, there is only one party in the British political sphere that is taking our responsibility seriously. That's the Conservative. It's not as sexy. It's not as sexy, but I have no doubt that by the next general election, economic competence is going to be the sales point. And your question was, and I knew I should have had shorter answers because I can't remember quite your question.
Social and affordable.
Social and affordable housing. Well, a couple of things. We've got a terrible situation, particularly in London, for example, where social and affordable housing targets are making projects economically unviable, and they're just not being built. And 40% of zero is zero. And actually, having perhaps a smaller percentage of a bigger number will help the people that need support into housing. And the Conservatives have always been supportive people that need help keeping a roof over their heads, and that will never change, never change. But we've also got to recognise that the current disposition, particularly in London, is the gulf between the distorted market cost because of Sadiq Khan's ineptitude and the discounted cost for affordable housing still makes that affordable housing unaffordable. And that's doing no one any favours. So we do need to liberalise the housing market. We do need to get more churn in the housing market. We do need to create dynamism. One of the things I'll talk about today in the speech, and I'm not going to give too much away, is the fact we've got terrible underutilisation both of space, but also pre-existing properties. We've got empty nester properties that have got 2, 3, 4 empty bedrooms, and have done in some instances for decades. That has got to change. Now you kind of think to yourself, well, how does that help someone? How does freeing up a 5-bedroom house help someone that is maybe looking at affordable housing? Well, guess what? You get the ripple effect of everyone relocating, and suddenly smaller and more affordable houses, homes, flats, whatever, are coming onto the market, and suddenly the gulf between market cost and supported cost ideally closes a bit. But again, if your headline is, oh, we're going to have this really big affordable housing target, and the result of that headline is nothing gets built, you're not helping anybody. And it's either inept or it is cynical. Looking at Sadiq Khan, I think there's a big dose of ineptitude there.
Yeah.
Cool.
So I think we've got time for one more round of 3 questions.
And I'll try and give shorter answers.
Okay, well, might manage to do that. So we'll have the gentleman in the second row in the grey, and then if we have the gentleman in the blue shirt in the front row, and then if we're going, the lady on the front row here.
Cool.
Hi, James. I'm Sam. And I wanted to ask if there are any plans on reforming the liquidity of the housing market, such as removing the stamp duty to sort of boost labour mobility and housing market in general.
Cool. Good. Sound question. Good question.
You can answer mine at the end. Just, what's your favourite Warhammer army?
The serious questions are coming out now.
Hi, my name is Daniela Papo. Being a young person under the age of 20, housing is something that's really important to me because I want to live near my family. So my question is, with the average first-time buyer now being 33 and needing over £61,000 for a deposit, what is the government going to do to help young people afford their own homes?
Yeah, good question. So why don't I work backwards? No, I'll come to you in the end. Look, I've touched upon some of the things that are aspirations, which is about creating liquidity. We have a ridiculously illiquid housing market in the UK, particularly in London and the South East. There are so few transactions. It is awful. As I say, that then creates situations where you have these empty nester couples. Under occupancy should be a challenge that we can overcome pretty quickly. It doesn't take any bricks, or it doesn't take any buildings, it doesn't take any planning. It just takes the system to take its thumb off the pause button, and we can get a whole load done without having to lay a single course of bricks anywhere. So if you're doing a systems analysis exercise, look for the easy fixes first. And creating liquidity in the market strikes me as one of the easier fixes. Just takes it takes an appetite, and it takes making sure the books balance, which is one of the reasons why Mel is being very, very careful, making sure that we can identify where we're going to cut taxes, or we're going to cut taxes where we're going to cut spending. Okay, he's doing a very disciplined exercise there, and he's right to do so. But ultimately, we do need to free up the market. Actually, Mel made a really, really good announcement today, which is allowing young working people to use their own money by reducing the tax burden. Oh, I love this. By reducing the tax burden on people. Did you hear that?
I did.
By reducing the tax burden on people. I love those words. We are allowing people to use their own money. It's not a state subsidy. This is their money to build up a deposit for their own homes. And this is getting back to the philosophical heart of the Conservative Party. This is not about tax and subsidise. It's about reducing the tax burden on hard-working people so they can spend their own money on buying something that they value. That is at the heart of conservatism. And that's a policy, £5,000 of which Mel announced this morning. It's a step in the right direction. It's not a silver bullet. It's a good step in the right direction, and demonstrates a direction of travel where we, whenever we can, where it balances the books, easing the tax burden, give people the opportunity to spend the money on the things they value. And with regard to my favourite, so I have lots and lots of pots of green paint, which is why I have both orcs and dark angels. Most of the room have got no idea what this is about. This is what this is about. So I've got loads of orcs and loads of dark angels, but I don't have as much at the moment, as Lady C will attest. I've not been painting very many miniatures because at the moment I'm painting the dining room. And I discovered something. This goes back to the thing, maybe about there might be a Lib Dems joke embedded in here somewhere. I can't remember. So our ceilings were wallpapered And I discovered something about wallpaper on ceilings. Either it comes off so easy that if you look at it funny, it just drops off the ceiling, or it hangs on for dear life and resists almost any and every attempt to remove it from the ceiling. And what I discovered is 90% of the wallpaper on the ceiling came off with just a stern look from me, and the other 10% required me with a painter's palette knife, like scraping away, steaming, scraping, steaming. I don't know why I'm telling you this. It's a therapy session.
It's good life advice. We had one final question just on stamp duty, and because we obviously we talked about the 5,000 gift, but did you want to follow up on your first question on stamp?
Yeah, it was part of the housing reform we talked about. If there were plans to maybe remove stamp duty, cut down the time it takes to sell or buy a house, and just making the market more liquid. And I think you touched on some of that.
Yeah. So as I say, I'm not going to make unbalanced tax or spending commitments, but ultimately the question we should always ask ourselves is the market functioning the way this market should function? And we have got massive surplus demand for housing, particularly in London and the South East. And yet the market isn't responding in the way markets would be. Left to its own devices, there would be a market correction. There would be a lot more houses built to match the surplus demand that we currently see. But that is not what is happening. So we need to ask ourselves, why is there not a market response? There is a demand for houses, but houses are not being transacted. They're neither being built nor being bought and sold. So what is stopping that from happening? And where we can, we should look to remove those blockers to both building and purchasing and selling. And so that is the ultimate direction of travel. But say, I'm not going to get ahead. I'm not going to try and bump Mel into tax and spending or tax reduction commitments. But that is without a shadow of a doubt our direction of travel.
Well, it's just as well you're not anticipating everything, because we've got future Conservative Party conferences still to come.
Indeed. So
we'll look forward to those. But in the meantime, James, a big thank you. You've been a brilliant guest, and can I just ask for a round of applause? And I would add that for those of you who love a good in-conversation format, that we're doing the same with Alex Burghardt this afternoon in here. So do please join us for that. Thank you.